everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Words or Less, the podcast. I am your host, Ray Harkins. I apologize. This episode was late. It's all my fault. I didn't do something properly, so my producer, Tom Richfield, could not properly edit the show, and that's my fault. Craziness ensued. Anyways, I'll tell you that in a minute. Let's talk about the guest. We'll get some business. Then I'll talk about what delayed this episode, and then we'll dive right into the interview. Eyal Levi. He is a producer extraordinaire, as well as a founder of death metal, black metal band called Daath. He's recorded, basically, if you are into heavy music of the metal variety, he's probably recorded a band that you enjoy. From Whitechapel to Black Dahlia Murder, he works out of Audio Hammer Studios in Florida. I've wanted him on the show for a while, but a friend of the show, publicist Ryan Friedman, hit me up about this, and I was like, you know what? Let's talk to him about that. I've known Eyal for quite some time because when I was working at Century Media, that's when we signed his old band Daath. And I locked into him. I just immediately felt a kinship with him, even though we came from two separate worlds as far as metal and me being a punk and hardcore kid. And when I say two separate, it's not like we were, on completely opposite sides of the spectrum, but nonetheless, we clicked, we bonded, and I felt a kinship with him. So more on him in a minute. Like I said, let's go about this in a methodic fashion. So for those of you that have noticed, the show is a new logo. The show has some new music that's being played. Big shout outs to Empty Design for doing the new logo, and huge shout outs to Ben from Cloud Kicker for giving the music exclusively to the show. Granted, he may use it at some point in his own compositions, but as of right now, all this podcast. So yeah, if you want to hear nice Cloud Kicker music, you just listen to the podcast, and that's it. So I got a lot of positive feedback for those two things, and I'm just so excited because here we are, 3 years into the show, and I'm still excited about it. And that's sometimes hard to do because, after you get done with a few weeks of something, and then you're like, oh, but this kind of feels like work now. And yeah, there are certain elements of this that feel like work, but overall, it's so much fun for me to do, and I love it. So thank you for contributing to the show financially. Thank you for the emails that you've sent, and I love interacting with people. Just the other night, I was out at a show, and someone came up to me and said, hey, I like your podcast. And hearing that is so awesome because then it connects the real world to the digital world, and so many awesome things stem from that. So anyways, if you want to email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com, and then visit the website, 100wordspodcast.com. And so why this episode is delayed? Well, I'm an idiot, and I didn't record this intro properly, and I sent our producer a blank file. Stupid me. And then he hits me up because he's like, hey, that file's not working. Well, that's because I'm dumb. And then, oh man, I had to take care of a dog I found on the street. And let me tell you, it was a whirlwind 12 hours. Found him outside of a show and was like extremely, extremely friendly. Didn't know what to do because, this was like midnight in the city of Pomona. And I'm like, I don't know. I guess I can look around for people. So try to call animal control. They are absolutely of no help. So I'm like, you know what? I am for sure not leaving this dude out on the street to potentially get hit, hurt, die, injured, bad stuff that can happen when you find an animal in need. Because, me being the animal lover that I am, I was like, you know what? I got to take care of this. So took him home, slept in the garage next to him just so he could kind of calm down. But he was so friendly. And honestly, in less than 12 hours, when I dropped him off at the shelter, I was crying. And I know that sounds melodramatic or cheesy or whatever label you want to put on it, but I was truly connected to this guy. So needless to say, right in the middle of that is when I discovered that I sent our producer a blank file. And you know what? Did the listener need to know that? No. But at the same time, it kind of gives you a whole perspective, even though I've been told I use the word too much, but gives you a whole picture of how this show comes together. I try to be professional. I try to make sure that this thing comes out on time. And generally speaking, it does. Every Wednesday, you'll get an episode, but sometimes stuff happens. So anyways, without further ado, here is our discussion with Eyal. So many interesting things. Even if you don't care about the bands he's recorded or the fact that he's a producer, he has an amazing, amazing story. And he has a very, very interesting perspective on just work in general, putting the sweat equity into stuff. So here's my discussion with Eyal. I will talk to you after the interview is over. personal introduction to you and all of your musical endeavors and talents and such. But I remember when I was working at Century Media, and you came by basically for an office visit, and usually those office visits sometimes are awkward and kind of like, oh, I didn't know that this person was coming by. I remember you coming into the office, and I remember meeting you, and maybe it was just at a certain time where I was kind of frustrated with a lot of either the bands I was working with at the label or whatever. They just basically, you seemed cool, and you kind of seemed like, oh, like this dude's on the level, and he seems like he's got a good head in his shoulders about his band and the way that they want to like do things. I felt like so many of the bands that I was working with were just like, they were never rooted in any sort of like, I wouldn't even so call it like a scene, but it was just like, they just, heads in the clouds, like, oh, this is where we want to be, and this is like how big of a band we are. I don't know, you seemed like the antidote for it. And I just picked a lot of that up in our, 15, 20 minutes of hanging out there. Traveling in the worlds that you've obviously traveled in, meeting different bands from different genres, like, would you classify yourself as kind of like, is my characterization of you accurate in any way, shape, or form?
That I'm much more grounded in reality than a lot of other people in this game. Yeah,
and maybe in particular, obviously, like, metal, just because that obviously, even though that comes from a scene, sometimes, bands expect to be larger than they really are. So yes, a simple question is the rootedness.
Well, look, that drives me insane with production as well, is dealing with the disconnect between reality and dreamland that bands have. And mind you, we do need to say that this is not me saying that it's not okay to dream or anything like that. You need to have your dreams, and you need to figure out how you're going to go about achieving them. And you need to be aware enough to know when you're off the path to your dreams enough to make conscious decisions to correct so you can get there eventually. But what you're talking about is just like this idea that some bands have that they are this size band, and they just because they decided they are, not because the world told them. It's just they decided that they're this size band and they're going to act this way, and so they try to structure their interactions with people and what they expect of people based on what size band they think they are or would really, really like to be. It kind of sucks. It kind of sucks dealing with them. So yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Right. And it was, like I said, I think it was just emblematic of maybe the time that I, like that particular moment at the record label where it was, I felt encouraged by our interaction, because I was like, okay, here's a band that obviously firmly resides within the, metal world, but doesn't have these sometimes like, these inflated egos where, whatever, they're huge in Europe and then they tour the States and they're like, why aren't there 1,000 people at the show? And it's like, well, because no one cares about you over here. Like, I don't know what to tell you. Like, we're trying.
Maybe because all you did was play some festivals in Europe, you idiot, and nobody was there for you, and you got this false impression of your own size, and you came back to reality and realized that you're a glorified local band on a label that doesn't give a fuck about anybody but vampires everywhere. So grow up, you little piece of shit.
Yes. I think the Vampires Everywhere reference will be lost to many, but you and I can identify with it.
Okay, so for those who don't know what the Vampires Everywhere reference is, and since this podcast is supposed to be honest, we'll just say that there was this band called Black Veil Brides who's still around and killing it. And at one point in time, some people at Century Media thought that they had found the answer to Black Veil Brides, and this was this ridiculously awful band called Vampires Everywhere. Now, I'm not going to argue if Black Veil Brides is good music or not. That's not the point. But they are very popular, and they've stayed very popular, and there's a lot behind it, all the way from marketing to lineup choices to production choices. They've got it going on. So anyways, Vampires Everywhere was the Century Media answer to Black Veil Brides, and so it is fact that they just cut a lot of people's budgets and funneled that money into Vampires Everywhere in hopes of the next big thing, which just didn't really happen because they suck horribly.
Yeah.
God, if you think Black Veil Brides are bad, for those of you who don't like them, you should hear Vampires Everywhere if you want to know what bad really is.
It's an important point that you make, because there definitely is the context of, deciding on something and making a marked shift within the way that bands at a record label are treated. And, that your experience, what you're talking about is very, like I said, emblematic. And I think sometimes the labels that obviously have, more success over a longer period of time, kind of stick to what they know, and not in a, you can't think outside of your own box, but don't make the, analogous correlation of like, oh yes, well this must be popular, so we need to get something that looks like that, which is exactly what you describe.
Well, yeah. Well, the problem with that is if you analyze something, you come back with certain data. Like, okay, so there's this band called Black Veil Brides, and they're popular, and they look kind of like Motley Crue, and they're popular with the teenies. So the answer must be, we need a band that kind of looks like that kind of sounds in that range, kind of like cock rock meets metalcore, and that's what's popular now. So let's just do it, and it'll work. Now that's missing a very vital part of the equation. They're just correlating the data, but they're not taking it a step further. They're basically taking the data and correlating it to whatever they want it to mean. So if they have a theory that girls are into guys that look like they're from Motley Crue, they're going to find the band that's popular that way and say, see, girls are into guys that look like they're Motley Crue. That's what we need to do. Instead of taking it a step further and actually analyzing all their different streams of income that they have access to, analyzing where on social media they're big, what market they're big in, what kinds of people those all are, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, rather than taking a very superficial view of the band's success and correlating it to what you think it means. They may have found that it wasn't Vampires Everywhere that needed to be pushed, but you never know.
No, you never know until it's tried. But yeah, you're right. The false causal connection is not always the way to go. But you were backing up. You were born in Cleveland, correct?
Mm-hmm.
I usually paint the Midwest with a very broad brush of being, very kind of boring. Was that your experience kind of growing up in the Midwest?
I mean, you could say that, but my family's not American, and we traveled a lot, and we didn't exactly have an American household. So It wasn't like your typical, cornfield and beer type upbringing or anything.
Right.
So
yeah, it's noted. You've mentioned in many interviews, and a lot of people have brought up that your father is a conductor and composer, and that obviously kind of sparked your interest in music because you were kind of surrounded by it. So that was that's the upbringing you're referencing as far as not typical.
Yeah, exactly, and just things like the way that non-American families interact with each other and the things they find important are just different. And so I never thought my childhood was boring at all. I didn't know I was in the Midwest. I didn't know what the Midwest was. I just, was a kid and went to school and had some friends, had some enemies, played with some stuff, built some stuff, destroyed some stuff, made some other stuff, pooped a lot.
Right.
Cried.
Did you, so what was the rest of your family structure like? Do you have brothers and sisters? And what did your mom do for a living?
She was a teacher, I think.
Okay.
Hard to remember my mom working because she hasn't worked in a while.
Okay.
So I think back then she was a teacher, though, elementary school.
Okay.
That's all I really remember. 2 brothers younger.
Okay, so you were the elder. You were the one that was supposed to guide your younger brothers into some semblance of cool stuff.
Man, I failed at that.
What path did they end up taking?
The middle brother is in Hollywood trying to do the drama thing.
Oh, okay.
And then my youngest brother, he's probably going to be okay. He's graduating with a business degree from Georgia State, so he'll be all right. He's probably the one that'll be fine.
Right, that's practical. Yeah. like you've mentioned, I'm not going to belabor the point with your father being, you know, a conductor and a composer and everything like that, just because that's, you know, it's pretty well documented in most of the other interviews that you do. But there obviously comes a point where I'm sure the music that you started to, you know, get into in your, you know, formative years in high school and stuff like that, your father probably was like, I don't understand this. Like, you know, this isn't, there's nothing I can wrap my head around. So like, when was that sort of schism between the music that your obviously father knew and knew how to identify, even if it was obviously rock music just by the sheer composition of it?
Well, let's clarify something first.
Please, let's clarify.
Dad's not the, I don't understand this. Why don't we sit here and talk about it? I cannot wrap my head around it. He's not that kind of guy.
Okay.
He's, this is shit. You should not be listening to this garbage kind of guy.
Okay. What did you bring home that he said that?
Well, I hit it. Yeah, I remember him coming in one day when I was listening to like the Black Album by Metallica, and him just pressing stop and saying, "You should not listen to this garbage," and leaving. And like, all right, I'm hitting play again. And the next thing I know, the stereo's gone. So
you learned quickly.
Yeah, I had to beg for it back. And then from that point on, I just hid my music. And that was that.
Was it sheerly just based off of obviously the musical dissonance that he heard, or was there any sort of, you know, religious overtones to like, oh man, this is filth he's listening to?
The whole religious thing against metal is a very much American thing. And I mean, you see it in other countries, but it comes from an American religious right standpoint, and you have to kind of know their political agenda to understand that. And my dad, being a foreigner, just pretty new to the U.S. and not so privy to political leanings here, obviously that wasn't what it was. It just sounded like noise to him.
Right.
And, you know, his pristine brain that only knew classical music couldn't understand what this noise was, and he didn't want his oldest son to listen to it, so he took it away. And that's all there is to it. He really wasn't aware of any of the censorship battles or Satan stuff or any of that.
Yeah. Did you find yourself being raised where you were, in some respects, you were obviously being like, I guess, shielded from American culture? I mean, obviously reflecting back on it, is there anything that you can look at that?
I was totally shielded from American culture. I was not allowed to go to public school. I was not allowed to watch MTV. I couldn't play video games during the week. No TV during the week, except for like one episode of G.I. Joe, and then it's off. They made me do cultural things. I was totally shielded from American culture, and I consider myself American, and I'm not. I wouldn't say I'm like a patriot or anything like that. But I love it here, especially because I've gotten to see what the rest of the world is like. But it's probably a good thing that they saved me from backwards ass youth culture of this country, because man, the way American kids are brought up scares me for the future of this country.
Sure. So in respects, you look back on that and you're like, even though it was a bummer at the time, you're glad you had that sort of cloistered upbringing.
Absolutely. I mean, I didn't develop video game addictions while I was in high school or middle school. I didn't develop TV addictions. So guess what I did instead? I made music. I drew books and wrote books. I illustrated them, so I said I drew books. But I did things with my brain. I got horrible grades because I couldn't bring myself to care about that, but I was still doing something, and that something was not watching TV like everyone else. I did at times get bummed out about it, but I think it's one of the best decisions that could have been made. And to the American classmates of mine, it just seemed like living under the Gestapo or some shit like that. Like they couldn't imagine not being able to watch TV for like 4 or 5 hours a night and then do some homework.
just reflecting on what you're talking about, and then, looking at my completely American childhood, where everything that you're talking about, it wasn't to that extent, but it was definitely, there are shades of that. I was never shielded from video games or anything like that, but I'm an only child, and I was left to my own devices in regards to entertaining myself. And, while I did use whatever, G.I. Joes and all these other things to create these elaborate worlds, I do think you're hitting on a very important point of the sheer time that people obviously invest in things, and the sheer lack of, creativity and imagination that can sometimes be taken away when you are, like you said, just, completely consumed by these things that really don't challenge you or push any sort of learning agenda on you.
Yeah. And it's much worse today. It's way worse today, because the avenues for distraction are like times 1,000. It's hard for me too, even as an adult who was raised to not give in to distraction. Man, it's tough, because you're being bombarded by distraction stimuli everywhere. Everywhere you go, everything you do is distraction, distraction, distraction. So I actually think that it's a lot harder for kids now than it was for me. For me, it was just either TV, VCR, or Nintendo.
So then, like you mentioned, you obviously didn't necessarily identify with school and studying, and that wasn't something that was important to you. So when did you kind of start to develop your own musical taste? I mean, obviously you mentioned Metallica. Like, Cleveland is known to obviously have a rich heavy music / hardcore scene. Did you start to go to shows in high school and start to become aware of that subculture, or was it a little bit later?
Well, I was in Atlanta by then.
Oh, okay, got it.
I moved to Atlanta when I was 9, and I did start going to shows and having a band when I was like 13, 14.
Were you playing guitar in that?
Yeah, I started playing guitar when I was 12.
Okay. Oh wow, that's funny that so you pick it up, and within a year you're like, I want to play in a band. Was that like the focal point?
No, it was, I want to play in a band, I'm going to get a guitar.
Okay. Did you go the traditional route of being introduced to the guitar teacher stuff, or was it like, all right, I'm just kind of noodling around and learning on my own?
Okay, well, see, since I was 12 and not legally allowed to work, I had to get this through my parents, obviously, right. Because another thing that they didn't teach me how to do is rob people.
That's good.
So, yeah, right. So I had to find a way to get them to give me a guitar. What I ended up having to do was agree to 6 months of classical guitar. And if I would do that, then I'd get an electric guitar, because they wanted to, hopefully persuade me away from electric guitar, and B, not invest in electric guitar equipment if it was just going to be a passing kind of thing.
You had to prove yourself. That's interesting.
Yeah, so I did my 6 months.
Right. And at that time, were you pretty focused on like metal? Was that the thing that you wanted to do from that perspective? Like heavy music was your main identifier?
Yeah, absolutely. Heavy music, and some of the less heavy music that was big back then, like Alice in Chains and stuff like that. But yeah, mainly heavy music. I wanted to learn how to do anything Slash or Marty Friedman could do.
Got it. Those are your touchstones, as it were.
Yeah.
So what did you like moving to Atlanta? It seems like a pretty big shift from Cleveland to Atlanta. I mean, granted, you were young, so I'm sure you don't remember much, but.
No, I did not enjoy moving to Atlanta. I like Atlanta now, but I did not enjoy it back then.
I think that's kind of part and parcel for most kids. Like when they have to move, pretty much at any age between the ages of like 7 or 8, when you're actually conscious and have friends, up until like you're like 14 or 15. Those are the ages where if you move, you're just going to be resistant to it no matter what.
Also, there was a big shift in that in Cleveland, we were kind of anonymous, and in Atlanta, we were not anonymous. As we moved to Atlanta because my dad got a really big public job, and so they changed everything, and our whole life was different. It was very, very strange. So yeah, you went from being a totally anonymous kid to being like focus of a lot of people's attention.
So you had to, because the job that he got, like you said, was in the public eye. What was he doing, and how did obviously that sort of affect your behavior?
Well, he became the music director of the Atlanta Symphony. So it was all over all the papers, and I guess it was one of those like the local celebrity type positions. And it was one of those things where, they publish salaries of local people. They'd publish his in there too. So when you go to school, everyone's talking about your dad's salary. It's kind of weird. But, so kids aren't really, friendly to newcomers that they read about in the papers like that. So it was just interesting. Definitely had to adjust to how it would be like to have to react to that all day long.
Yeah, that's kind of a powder keg of of controversy when you set foot in your new school and everyone's just like, "Oh, dude, so you're super rich, right?" It's like, well, I don't know. Like, I don't see the money. Like, it's not my concern, really.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say super rich. It's just that they knew who he was.
Right. So I'm sure, yeah, that comes with baggage in and of itself.
Yeah, just that they knew who he was, and they knew. Let's just say that they had a competitive salary.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It's just it's hard to really describe in detail because it's so long ago. But let's just say that I had to learn how to navigate with eyes on me, which I guess has not changed since.
Were you kind of like I guess a typical archetype in regards to, a musician / metalhead? Were you adopting the fashion? Were you kind of, looking for others that identified with that as well?
Yeah, of course. Now, mind you, I moved to Atlanta when I was like 9, so metal didn't happen for a little while. But yeah, I was looking for other metal kids when I started getting into metal, but there were none.
Right.
So that's another thing that's kind of different nowadays, is that it seems like there's a lot more of them.
Yeah. Well, I definitely saw the I'm sure this is kind of emblematic of your experience too, where it's like, it wasn't so much like, whatever, metal, punk, hardcore, whatever genres that you want to call a particular lifestyle or aesthetic, people at that time just kind of gravitated towards one another because they knew it was like, oh yeah, I'm into, whatever, the Pixies and, Bauhaus. And then I'm also, I'll hang out with the metal kid because like we're both into weird music stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Because that defined you socially.
Absolutely.
Interestingly enough, I don't know if it does anymore. I'm sure it does in some way, but the thing is, I prided myself in being able to go to multiple social groups by the time I was in high school.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to get stuck with a lot of the metal kids, even though I looked for them at first. After a while, I kind of realized that they were just overly dramatic and way too negative. Acted like losers, honestly. Like they vandalized too much shit, got in too much trouble, were not really doing much. Like, they wanted to be in famous bands and all that, but I was the only one who would practice 5 or 6 hours a day on guitar. They wouldn't really practice. They were more about wearing the shirt, getting into the fight at the show, and vandalizing the property. They weren't into actually making the music. And so I decided that I didn't really want to associate with those people too much, and fuck them. I was just going to make my own friends. So I just walked through various different social groups and had different kinds of friends.
That's a really interesting point, because I do think that there's something that is intrinsically tied to ambition when you're younger. Pretty much any circle of friends or ecosystem that you exist in, ambition is met with like, dude, why are you trying so hard? Like it's cool to not try, it's cool to not care, especially like you're talking about in high school. And so that's cool that you were able to identify the limits of whatever it was you were confronted with, and then be able to kind of, subvert that and move past that and realize there's a larger world out there.
Yeah, well, it wasn't easy at times because it's a quick way to get ostracized by your friends. But hey, I mean, look, if there's two kids that are playing guitar that started at the same time, kid A plays some bullshit for 30 or 40 minutes a day, and kid B plays some bullshit for 30 or 40 minutes a day. And for the first 3 months, they're kind of at the same level. Maybe kid A even gets better faster for some reason. But then kid B gets serious about it and starts playing 3 hours a day of structured stuff. Soon he passes kid A. Kid A is no longer the alpha. And soon, Kid A is in his rear view mirror as a guitar player. Now, to kids, that can be harmful to your relationship as friends. It's not one of those things like if, you're friends with an adult and you both start playing racquetball at the same
Right.
time, just picking some like random adult thing. You're not going to stop liking somebody because they got way better than you. But as kids, not so much. So I kind of experienced that a few times over where I just took it more seriously than other people. And, as I got better, they stayed the same and they didn't like me for it. So fuck them.
Right. So then once you, like you mentioned, obviously you started your first, musical band project, whatever you like to call it, when you were 13. So did you immediately identify with the, I guess, live performance, like that aspect of it? Or was it just kind of the creation of it was more appealing initially?
No, we started playing live immediately.
And you immediately identified with that? You were like, this is rad. I like this.
Sometimes.
Right. I know it's a loaded question, especially looking back.
Well, when our shows went well, I loved it. And when they didn't, I hated it.
Right.
But the thing is that we still pushed through and we still went to studios and made little EPs and kept going and tried to fill the room with more and more people and focused on that kind of stuff rather than just making music.
Right.
So I've always been of the mind that if I'm just playing for myself or the bedroom, it's pointless.
Yeah.
Like there has to be some sort of a goal that involves doing something with it. Otherwise, why are you doing it?
No, it's an important point. And you also strike me because you were essentially the business guy in Daath. I presume that pretty much all of your entities that you've ever done, you've been kind of the pusher / business guy where you're handling a lot of the, logistics and organizational aspects of it.
It's true. That's true a lot of the times. Not in everything I'm involved in now, but that's generally been the thing.
Mm-hmm.
I just think that back then it's more because I cared more than anybody.
Yeah, that was the commonality where you're just like, well, I'm just gonna work harder at this.
Maybe just because I was bad with girls when I was younger and didn't have them to distract me or something.
Well, that could be that could be very true. Yeah, if you don't have these external things distracting you, you can obviously put all your eggs in that proverbial basket. Yeah,
and also, see, the thing is, my dad's level of success to me was how I was brought up, so it didn't seem all that extraordinary. I didn't think that was that difficult to accomplish. It just seemed to me like you work hard and this is what happens, which is kind of crazy. It's kind of weird thinking, but I always just thought that's what happened, and so that's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to work my ass off, and great things will happen. And a lot of people I knew said that it was super unrealistic, but since I grew up around it, it just seemed like real life to me. So I also didn't have a lot of those blocks that other people had about working hard for it. A lot of people just didn't work hard for it because they were scared.
It's true. That's a cool way of looking at it. And obviously, like you said, you didn't have that filter, so you were able to, just focus on the actual work rather than the actual, emotions of fear, doubt. I mean, everybody has doubt, obviously, but the fear-based stuff is what, can cripple people and obviously lead them down a road that they'll never even feel like they can get on stage and perform or something like that. So that's cool that you were able to subvert that. And so I presume as you kind of, went through high school and obviously, like, did you go to college? Like, did you have any other focal points as far as like, oh, this is what I guess I'm practically going to do with my life? Or was it always just music?
Well, I'm probably going to get hated, but I kind of wanted to enlist in the armed services when I was 18.
Oh, okay.
I didn't do it, obviously.
Right. What was the, I guess, desire from, and this comes from a very non-judgmental place, but what was the desire? The desire
being that, half my family's in Israel and the other half is in Mexico. I grew up knowing how dangerous the world really is. Like, we live in a bubble here in America, but I've had a firsthand look growing up in two unfriendly neighborhoods. and just seeing how much evil there is in the world. And I don't mean evil through heavy metal. I mean like evil that will cut your head off, or that will gun you down, or kidnap you for no reason to get in the fight. Not necessarily, as a foot soldier or whatever. I wanted to get into. Oh, I wanted to contribute mentally. I wanted to do something where I could use my brain to help the fight. So I wanted to enlist and eventually move on to an intelligence career. And I was seriously considering that too. My dad convinced me that I had too much to give. I had more to give musically than to that world.
It's a very practical approach. I like it's not running off of emotion. It's just purely running off of like, well, I think you would make more of a difference in this aspect than that aspect.
That's the only other career choice I considered.
Right. So when did Daath start to come into your ecosystem? Like, I mean, but by this time you obviously had been of college age or what have you. How old were you when Daath started?
19 or 20 or something. I was going to Berklee College of Music, bored as hell, not doing too well there. And I came to Atlanta over winter break, and I talked to a dude, and I asked him if we could do an electronic death metal side project. And we did it, and it was actually much better than the band I had going on back at Berklee. So we decided to start taking it seriously. That was around the year 99 or 2000 or something.
Okay.
And that's when it started.
Or I'm not going to run over the history of Daath because that's clearly well documented in interviews and your own your own Wikipedia entry, as it were. But when a band becomes like your all-consuming life, because you guys obviously put out records on Roadrunner and Century Media, and you had a very hardworking yet relatively successful career, just as far as like the sustenance of it, where you were able to still put out records.
Yeah, that's the amazing part. The amazing part isn't any of the numbers we pulled. The amazing part is just that we were allowed to keep going, and that's
it's true.
I know.
It's very true.
Very well that it's true. We should have been dropped after record 1 and forgotten about, and somehow we made it to record 3 and kept touring on real tours. Also,
right.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, like. There was a relevance around the band. Did you ever, just because, like I said, the band is all consuming and you obviously are completely connected with that. Did you ever, as things started to, become unpractical from, a financial perspective, did you ever have struggles within your own head of like where you were going to kind of pivot to, or was it just basically like, I can't, like you said, I can't even believe this band's still going. Like this is all ridiculous. And you had kind of had your eye on the recording stuff in the distance.
Yeah, well, that's exactly it. The band was moving forward on sheer thrust that me and the other guys were creating, but mainly me. And if the other guys are listening, well, sorry, but like mainly me flying to LA and convincing people to do stuff, and just like pushing, flying to Germany, pushing people to do stuff for us, and just like working it. Because if I didn't, people would stop caring in 5 seconds about us because we didn't sell that many records. So it was a lot of fucking work on my end to be able to get us moving. Now, the band itself put up a shitload of work when we were actually on the road to put on the best show possible, to like make these lights that were ahead of their time and all this stuff. But like to actually create the opportunities themselves in the first place was like pushing a boulder up a mountain because we didn't have the sales to back us up. So it was super exhaustive. And as you can imagine, not too much money was coming in. And so, yeah, at some point there's like, all right, how much longer are we going to keep doing this for? Like, we've had our fun. We've been on MTV. We've toured the world. We've done festivals in Europe and the US, been to Japan, put out lots of records, worked with the best producers. What else do we need to do to like, check that off on the list? Like, we've done it. Like, we have not achieved the part that's out of our control, which is it becoming a viral success or whatever, but you can't control that part. But as far as everything that we could control to make the band a success, we did. And once I was comfortable with that, which was sometime in the middle of record 2, once I was comfortable with that, then I started to think, okay, well then, now that I feel this way, how much longer can I actually keep up this level of effort? And I immediately started looking for other options.
I mean, I'm glad you laid it all out like that, because I definitely think it's. I mean, honestly, that's what endeared me to you in the first place, because I could tell it was through, like you said, the sheer force of inertia, where it was like you were creating the momentum, and it wasn't because of, you guys were ever a quote unquote hype band. There was like, there were pockets of that time, but it was like you were just trying to capitalize on those, and obviously was trying to link those into, a longer career based off that fact. But I think a lot of people of bands of varying sizes, could take some of those principles and obviously be able to apply that same level of hustle, regardless of if you're a hype band or not. Like, that will hopefully be able to sustain you for a little bit longer if you have that work ethic.
If you're a hype band, you have no fucking excuse.
It's true. It's true.
Everyone in a hype band should learn to be a millionaire. And I'm serious. Right. You can do it with all every member of Suicide Silence and every member of Attila should be a millionaire. And if they're not, there's something wrong there.
Yeah, they're doing something
because
wrong.
If my band could make the same amount of money per week per member as a lot of the dudes in the bigger bands we were sharing buses with, just because we were being entrepreneurial about it and seizing every opportunity, my band, my tiny little band that only got anywhere because I fucking flew around the world and talked people into putting us on tours. If we could do it, then there's no reason on earth why a band that actually has a huge fan base and real tour opportunities can't capitalize in a way to make them be pretty well off. Periphery do it pretty well. That's a good example.
That's a very good point. You started to have your eyes on the recording prize, as it were.
It wasn't much that. It was just that I was looking for the next step.
The next pivot, as it were.
Yeah.
And so what, I know this sounds like maybe kind of a stock, cheesy question, but because you have such an extensive experience in regards to not only performing music, but obviously recording music, writing, all that stuff. I know a lot of people, I mean, I'm projecting here because I personally, I don't necessarily enjoy recording. I like certain people to record with that obviously bring the sort of best, vocal performance out of me or whatever. But what aspects, or what part of the recording / engineering process do you personally kind of like identify with the most, where it's like, I get the most personal enjoyment out of, drum edits or whatever, using random examples, but like, what do you personally get the most enjoyment out of?
I don't really know. That's a good question, because I'm over it as well at this point with recording. Because the one thing that we never mentioned here is that I started recording the same year that Daath began. You were
building up those principles in conjunction with the band.
Yeah, exactly. So I started recording professionally in about 2003. That's not like a new thing for me.
You were able to focus on it at that time, like later, when you were able to apply those principles you learned to a more full-time experience.
Yeah, exactly. But the thing is, by 2006, when Daath was signed, I kind of wanted to quit recording because I hated working with bands.
Mm-hmm.
So I was really, really thankful that the record deal came along and that maybe I could record less and focus on other things, because it was making me insane to work with bands. Lots of the same things you said about your time at Century Media. Well, that doesn't change when you're in the studio. You just change the scenario. Say it's not that they're talking to you as the record label person, and they're expecting you to make them something they can't be. In the studio, it is that, but with music, it's like, I didn't really finish writing this song. Can we record it? Here's a bunch of riffs I can't actually play. Let's record it. But I want it to sound like this record I love that had 5 times the budget and players that rule. So I don't know. That started to make me crazy, so I was happy to stop. And when I came back into it, I noticed that didn't really change too much. Bands are pretty much like that.
Yeah, that's true. That's definitely, I guess, that quality is timeless. So you reflect on your time now currently, like, obviously knee deep in recording and from that perspective. So there's no aspect that you really kind of can identify as far as.
No, I'm actually taking a 6-month hiatus from recording. Yeah, so I'm not knee deep in recording right now, thank God. What do I like about it? I like, this is going to sound crazy, but the thing I liked the best about it was showing other people how to do it.
The teaching aspect of it.
Not teaching like guitar lessons or whatever. Like the stuff I was doing with Creative Live or the boot camps, that kind of stuff. I was actually enjoying that a lot more than actually working with the bands, believe it or not. And that's crazy to me because I hate giving guitar lessons and I hate that sort of thing, and I hated school. But being honest with myself, I got a lot more out of going on Creative Live and talking about this stuff and helping people out than sitting there with another band with the same fucking breakdown and the same idiot band members, just different names as the last 18 bands, putting out the same garbage that's killing our industry over and over and over and over. That was starting to really wear me down. I have a very, very negative opinion of the recording process now because I feel like it is part of the virus, part of the cancer, depending on how you look at it. So I felt like going out there and helping people get better at it would be my way of maybe raising the bar a little, maybe possibly helping people add some standards to their work, possibly. Maybe by raising the bar and by helping people raise their standards, a few of the people who us pros would have to mix would deliver us some better quality tracks, or hell, maybe more people putting out their own music would be putting out better quality music, which would then have a little more value to it. Maybe, possibly, might help it get taken seriously just ever so slightly more than before. Maybe, possibly. Maybe I'm the dreamer. But I think that was my way of creating a little bit more value than to just take one more band in, one more band out, the fucking horrible machine that's just making music suck.
Well, no, I can understand exactly where you're coming from. It is weird, the correlation between like, playing in a band and playing shows and stuff like that to teaching, because there are a lot of people who have played in bands that are like, when they're off the road, they're like substitute teachers, because the correlation between those two is somewhat analogous because, you're obviously, from an entertainment perspective, you're sitting there in front of people and entertaining them for that period of time. And, you could obviously argue that you're doing the same thing if you're teaching from an entertainment perspective, but then also you're actually hopefully affecting some semblance of change. And so I could see why that is exciting for you because, yeah, you're not just, like you said, part of that machine of creating sort of, faceless bands, but you are hopefully impacting people using those, principles that you've learned. And also, I think importantly, the kind of mindset that you're going at it with, where it's like, hey, this is how to record a real band, like with people actually playing music in the studio. Do you guys know what that is?
Yeah, exactly. I think that there's more people right now interested in learning how to do it for themselves than there are interested in paying other people to do it for them. And maybe, and I feel like those numbers are changing as well. Like, I feel like the number of people who want to do it themselves is going up, while the number of people willing to pay other people for it is going down. And I feel like that's one of those numbers that we can't fight. Just like we can't fight the whole downloading thing. And people who think we can, what else can I say? They're retarded. Like, they're so stupid. How can you fight a tsunami? Anyways, so I feel like the number of people that are wanting to do this for themselves are going up. And so that's where the demand is. And that's a perfect opportunity to help raise the bar for everything. Because if music is better, people will take music a little bit more seriously. That I'm pretty sure of. Whether or not they'll buy it more, I don't know about that.
You could feel like you can go to sleep at night because you're contributing this as opposed to that.
Yeah, and also I'm also looking at it from 10 years out. If this trend continues, what does that mean? If the trend continues that DIY is overtaking everything in recording, less and less people are interested in paying other people to record them, where does that lead 10 years out?
Right. No, true. It's
for the studio, for owner,
absolutely,
or for the producer.
The last thing I want to hit on, just because I think it's an important point. The general consensus, and I'm applying this to you, whether or not you agree with me is a different story. But yeah, I mean, you're opinionated, and obviously, like what you're talking about, all the opinions you're sharing on here, are obviously, visceral and reactive, where people could obviously be like, oh no, fuck that. But generally speaking, the way that you present yourself is that you're nice. Like people, I don't see many people being like, oh dude, fuck him, like he's the worst. And if they do, it's usually something that's inconsequential. It's like, it's their own insecurities. That isn't the default habit for a lot of people, just to kind of, whatever, the golden rule of treat each other like how you want to be treated. Do you, does that come, like, I guess, naturally to you? Is that like your own personable self, or is that something that you've kind of, I guess, evolved in over time? I mean, ever since I've known you, you've always been just, a stand-up dude, and I've never, like I said, I've never heard anything bad about you from that perspective. So I'm
sure you'll find bad stuff if you look hard enough.
As most people, but yeah, generally speaking, like I guess what I'm trying to ask is obviously like is your sort of default being like, yeah, I want to be nice, I want to be good to people, or is that something that you've obviously had to kind of grow into and learn as you grow older and mature?
It's my default, and as a matter of fact, as I get further in life, it's something that I need to make sure I keep in check. When you swim with sharks, if you don't become one, you get eaten. So I find that if I'm not careful, that default mode of just being cool starts to slip, and I do start to become more of an asshole, and I do start to give people less of a chance, and so on and so forth. All these music industry veteran cliches. So actually, I have to work a lot harder at it now than when I used to. Than I used to have to. But it is my default. The thing is that if you're in a certain environment long enough, you'll start to take on the characteristics of that environment. So your environment is rife with drama and childishness and negative shit. You will start to take on characteristics of someone that's childish and vindictive and negative. And those are characteristics of the music industry. Anyone that's in it knows that. So, I have to make a special effort to try to remain, cool.
Right. No, that's true. Yeah. You definitely could be impacted, like you said, very negatively by the environment that you're surrounding with, or the industry, as it were. So I really appreciate you hanging out. This has been a fun chat, and we got to hit on some important points that I wasn't even anticipating. So you did a great job.
Good. Thanks. Glad to help.
Yeah, no problem, man.
So there you go. There's Eyal. Great story, right? Composer father. Crazy, right? To have that much music coming into your head at an early age must be pretty intense and daunting, because you're like, oh, I want to make my own stuff, but look at my dad. Here's this thing he's doing. So anyways, thank you to Eyal. Thank you to Ryan Friedman, his publicist. Thank you to Tom Richfield, as always, for making sure that this show sounds as good as it does and is edited and produced appropriately, even though I sometimes fail at it. So thank you, Tom. Visit 100wordspodcast.com. You can email the show, 100wordspodcast@gmail.com. Please do that. I like creating these friendships with people, because, they throw some guest suggestions. I ask them why that's interesting, and then I ask them where they're from, and it just kind of spirals into there. And then I get a nice little life story about what it is that this person finds of value in the show. So anyways, those are the things. Until next week, and I promise I'll be on time. Be safe, everybody.